The sound of gunshots pierced the desert air, forcing Zara Daniels to bury her face in the crook of her elbow as the stagecoach she traveled in veered sharply to the right. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. What had begun as a journey to a new life was quickly becoming a nightmare as outlaws descended upon the coach with ruthless efficiency. "Everybody out," a gruff voice commanded as the stagecoach finally skidded to a halt. Zara's heart thundered in her chest as she was roughly pulled from the vehicle. The three masked men had already shot the driver, and now they were dragging the passengers into the scorching afternoon sun. An elderly couple clung to each other, a businessman clutched his briefcase, and Zara stood alone, her cream-colored dress already stained with dust and sweat. "Valuables. Now." The tallest outlaw aimed his pistol directly at Zara's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The words caught in her throat like barbed wire, her voice paralyzed by the terror coursing through her veins. This had happened before in moments of extreme fear. Her voice simply vanished, as if stolen away by the panic that consumed her. "Are you deaf, girl?" The outlaw stepped closer, pressing the cold barrel against her temple. "Speak up." Zara's lips trembled, but still, no sound emerged. Tears welled in her eyes as she fumbled with the small reticule hanging from her wrist, desperately trying to comply. "She ain't worth the trouble, Hank," one of the other outlaws called. "Just shoot her and let's move on." The one called Hank cocked his pistol, and Zara closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But instead of a gunshot, she heard a new voice, deep, commanding, and coming from somewhere behind the stagecoach. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Zara's eyes flew open as a tall figure emerged from behind a nearby rock formation. He sat atop a chestnut stallion, rifle aimed steady, his face partially obscured by the brim of his worn leather hat. The sun at his back cast him in silhouette, like an avenging angel materialized from the desert itself. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy," Hank spat, keeping his gun on Zara. "I'm making it my concern." The stranger's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "Now, you boys can ride away and live to see another sunset, or we can end this right here." What happened next unfolded in a blur. Hank swung his gun toward the newcomer, but the cowboy was faster. 2 shots rang out, and 2 of the outlaws dropped. The third fired wildly before scrambling onto his horse and fleeing into the desert. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, checked the fallen men to confirm they were dead, then turned his attention to the shaken passengers. "Is anyone hurt?" His eyes, a startling shade of blue, finally landed on Zara. She stood frozen, unable to voice her gratitude or explain her condition. "Miss," he approached her slowly as one might a spooked horse. "Are you injured?" Zara shook her head, trying desperately to form words, but her voice remained locked away, hidden in a place she couldn't reach. The cowboy studied her for a moment, understanding dawning in his expression. "It's all right. You don't have to speak." He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "Name's Dawson Grant. I reckon you folks could use some help getting to the next town." Over the next hour, Dawson helped bury the driver and secure the stagecoach. The elderly couple decided to wait for the next scheduled coach, which would pass through in 2 days, and the businessman chose to join them. But when Dawson looked questioningly at Zara, she pointed to his horse and then to the horizon, her intentions clear even without words. "You want to come with me to Silver Creek?" he asked, and she nodded emphatically. Dawson seemed to consider this for a moment before agreeing. "It's a day's ride. Can you handle that?" Zara nodded again, determination replacing some of the fear in her eyes. As they prepared to leave, The elderly woman pressed a small notebook and pencil into Zara's hands. "For when you need to say something, dear," she whispered kindly. Dawson helped Zara mount his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode away from the site of the attack, Zara opened the notebook and carefully wrote her first message to the man who had saved her life. "Thank you. My name is Zara Daniels. I can't speak when I'm scared." Dawson read it over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. "Well, Miss Daniels, I reckon you've got plenty to be scared about today. But you're safe now. I promise." As they continued through the rugged landscape, the silence between them was filled with the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. Zara found herself relaxing against Dawson's solid chest, grateful for his quiet acceptance of her condition. When they stopped to water the horse at a small creek, Zara wrote another note. "I'm traveling to Silver Creek to live with my aunt. My parents died of fever in St. Louis." Dawson nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Silver Creek's a decent town. Been working as a ranch hand there for the past year." As the day progressed, Zara shared more through her written words. She was 20 years old, had worked as a seamstress back east, and had lost her voice during a fire that had nearly claimed her life when she was 16. Since then, extreme fear would trigger the same response: complete silence, as if her voice had been stolen away. "Some folks talk too much anyway," Dawson commented with a gentle smile. "And there's plenty to be said without words." They reached Silver Creek as the sun was setting, painting the modest frontier town in hues of gold and amber. Zara's aunt, Eleanor Daniels, ran the town's only boarding house, a 2-story building with a wide porch and clean windows that stood out among the dustier establishments. "Aunt Eleanor's been expecting me," Zara wrote as they dismounted in front of the boarding house. The door flew open before they could knock, and a silver-haired woman with Zara's same green eyes rushed onto the porch. "Zara, oh, my dear girl, I've been sick with worry. The stagecoach should have arrived hours ago." Zara fell into her aunt's embrace, tears of relief streaming down her face. Eleanor looked over Zara's shoulder at Dawson, who stood awkwardly holding his hat. "And who might you be, young man?" "Dawson Grant, madam. There was trouble with the stagecoach outlaws. I happened to be nearby." Eleanor's face paled. "Oh, good heavens! Is she?" She pulled back to examine her niece. "Zara, are you all right? Can you speak?" Zara shook her head, pointing to her throat with a helpless gesture. Understanding crossed Eleanor's features. "It's happened again, hasn't it? Just like after the fire." Dawson cleared his throat. "If I might explain, madam, Miss Daniels has been using this notebook to communicate." She explained that her voice, well, it goes away when she's frightened. Eleanor nodded, squeezing Zara's hand. "It may take some time to return. Last time it was nearly 2 weeks." She turned to Dawson with genuine gratitude. "Mr. Grant, I insist you stay for supper. It's the least I can do after you've brought my niece safely to me." Dawson appeared ready to refuse, but something in Zara's pleading gaze changed his mind. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Daniels." "Miss Daniels," Eleanor corrected with a small smile. "And please call me Eleanor." That evening, as they sat around Eleanor's dining table enjoying a hearty meal of stew and fresh bread, Zara found herself studying Dawson. In the warm lamplight, she could fully appreciate his features: the strong line of his jaw dusted with stubble, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled. He was older than her, perhaps 28 or 29, with the weathered look of a man who spent most of his life outdoors. When Zara needed to express something, Dawson seemed to instinctively understand, often translating her gestures or expressions before she could write them down. "I think Miss Daniels is asking about your famous apple pie, Eleanor," he'd say, Or, she's wondering about the town, I believe. After dinner, as Alina cleared the plates, Dawson rose to leave. I should be getting back to the ranch, Mr. Wilson doesn't take kindly to hands who disappear for too long. Zara hurriedly scribbled in her notebook, then held it up. Will I see you again? Dawson's expression softened. I come into town most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps I'll stop by to see how you're settling in. Alina, returning from the kitchen, added, Mr. Grant, I've been thinking. Until Zara regains her voice, she'll need someone to help her navigate the town, introduce her to folks. Would you consider being her guide when you're not working? I'd compensate you, of course. Dawson looked surprised but not displeased by the suggestion. No compensation needed, Miss Alina. I'd be happy to help Miss Daniels. As he departed into the night with a tip of his hat, Zara felt a curious flutter in her chest, something beyond the residual fear of the day's events. Something that felt strangely like hope. True to his word, Dawson appeared at the boarding house early the following Saturday morning. Zara had just finished helping Alina serve breakfast to the boarders, 3 traveling salesmen, and a young schoolteacher who was waiting for the construction of the town's first proper schoolhouse to be completed. When Zara opened the door to find Dawson standing there, hat in hand and freshly shaved, she couldn't suppress her smile. She was still without voice, but in the week since the stagecoach incident, she had settled into a rhythm with her aunt, using the notebook less as they developed their own system of gestures and expressions. Good morning, Miss Daniels, Dawson said, his own smile warm. I thought I might show you around Silver Creek today, if you're amenable. Zara nodded enthusiastically, holding up one finger to indicate she needed a moment. She rushed upstairs to fetch her shawl and notebook, then scribbled a note to her aunt explaining where she'd be. Silver Creek was small by Eastern standards, but to Zara, it represented a new beginning. As they walked down the main street, Dawson pointed out the essential establishments. The general store, the blacksmith, the small doctor's office, the sheriff's building, and the saloon, which he noted was best avoided by proper ladies. And over there, he said, pointing to a modest building with a fresh coat of white paint, that's where Martha Wilson runs her dress shop. Your aunt mentioned you're a skilled seamstress. Martha's been looking for help. Zara's eyes lit up. She quickly wrote in her notebook, I would love to work there. Could you introduce me? That's why we're here, Dawson replied with a wink. Martha Wilson proved to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s with clever fingers and a talent for gossip. When Dawson explained Zara's situation, Martha waved away any concerns. Voice or no voice, it's skilled hands I need, Mr. Grant. Can she sew? Martha directed the question to Dawson, as many would in the coming days, speaking about Zara rather than to her. Before Dawson could answer, Zara stepped forward, gently taking a piece of fine lace from Martha's workbench. With quick, confident movements, she demonstrated an intricate stitch that made Martha's eyes widen. Well, I'll be, Martha breathed. Where did you learn that, girl? I've never seen anything so fine. Zara wrote in her notebook and Dawson read aloud. I apprenticed with Madame Laurent in St. Louis. She specialized in French lacework. Martha clapped her hands together. You're hired. Can you start Monday? As they left the dress shop, Zara practically bounced with excitement, grabbing Dawson's arm and squeezing it in gratitude. He laughed, the sound deep and pleasant. I take it you're pleased, Miss Daniels. She nodded vigorously, then wrote, Please call me Zara, and thank you. Dawson's expression turned serious for a moment. It doesn't seem right that folks talk to me instead of you, just because you can't answer back right now. I'll try to make sure they address you properly. Zara touched his hand, her eyes conveying her appreciation more eloquently than words ever could. They continued their tour, stopping at the general store where Dawson introduced her to the owner, a former prospector named Henry Jenkins, who had lost a leg in a mining accident. Unlike Martha, Henry spoke directly to Zara, waiting patiently as she wrote her responses. "My sister was mute from birth," he explained. "Smartest woman I ever knew, taught me to read using just a slate and chalk." By midday, they'd covered most of the town, and Dawson suggested they picnic by the creek that gave Silver Creek its name. He'd brought provisions, bread, cheese, apples, and a small jar of honey which they shared in comfortable silence, watching the clear water bubble over smooth stones. "I grew up not far from here," Dawson said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "My pa ran cattle on a small spread about 20 miles north. Ma died when I was 10. Pa followed 5 years later, gored by a bull. I've been on my own since then, working ranches, driving cattle, whatever pays." Zara listened intently, touched by his willingness to share his past. She wrote, "Do you ever get lonely?" Dawson considered the question, tossing a pebble into the creek. "I suppose I do. Never thought much about it till now." He glanced at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What about you? Before you lost your parents, were you courting anyone back east?" Zara shook her head, then wrote, "There was a man my father approved of, but I didn't care for him. He wanted a wife who would be seen and not heard even when I could speak." Dawson's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Sounds like a fool to me." As the weeks passed, Zara fell into a comfortable routine in Silver Creek. She worked at Martha's dress shop during the week, helped Alina with the boarding house in the evenings, and spent Saturdays with Dawson. Her voice remained elusive, but she found ways to communicate through writing, through gestures, through expressions that Dawson seemed increasingly adept at interpreting. "She says the blue would bring out Mrs. Peterson's eyes better than the green." Dawson would translate when a customer asked for Zara's opinion on fabric choices. Or, "She's wondering if you could tell her more about the cattle drive coming through next month," he would say to Sheriff Daniels, no relation to Zara, though the coincidence amused them both, when Zara tilted her head in question during one of their walks. Martha began to tease them, referring to Dawson as Zara's voice box. The nickname spread through town, but neither Zara nor Dawson seemed to mind. There was something intimate about the way he spoke for her, something that transcended mere words. One Saturday in late September, nearly 2 months after Zara's arrival in Silver Creek, Dawson took her riding. He'd borrowed a gentle mare named Buttercup from the Wilson Ranch, and they rode into the foothills that bordered the town to the west. "Thought you might like to see where I work," Dawson explained as they crested a rise that revealed the sprawling Wilson Ranch below acres of good grazing land. A cluster of buildings including a handsome main house, bunkhouse, and barn, and hundreds of cattle dotting the landscape. They rode down to meet Thomas Wilson, the ranch owner, a fair-minded man who greeted Zara warmly and invited them both to stay for the noon meal. Throughout the visit, Dawson stayed close to Zara's side, explaining her condition to those who didn't know and translating her written messages. "Dawson's one of my best hands," Wilson told Zara as they shared coffee on the porch afterward. "Been trying to convince him to take on more responsibility. He has a good head for the business side of ranching." Zara raised an eyebrow at Dawson, who looked somewhat embarrassed. "Mr. Wilson is being generous. I'm just a cowboy." "Nonsense," Wilson replied. "You've got talent, son. You should be building something of your own, not just working for wages your whole life." On the ride back to town, Zara wrote, "Wilson seems to think highly of you. Have you considered his offer?" Dawson was quiet for a long moment. "I've saved some money. Not enough for my own spread, but, well, I've had my eye on a small parcel of land. Previous owner lost it to the bank. It's nothing special, a cabin, a small barn, about 50 acres, but it could be a start. Zara wrote, "Why haven't you purchased it?" Dawson shrugged. Never had a reason to put down roots before. The way he glanced at her made Zara's heart skip. She looked away, suddenly conscious of a warm flush creeping up her neck. As they approached Silver Creek in the gathering dusk, a commotion on the main street caught their attention. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, where two men were engaged in a heated argument that was rapidly escalating toward violence. "Stay here," Dawson instructed, dismounting quickly and handing Zara the reins to both horses. She watched anxiously as he pushed through the crowd toward the disturbance. One of the men, a rough-looking character with a week's growth of beard and bloodshot eyes, had drawn his pistol and was waving it erratically. "You cheated me, Harrison, and everyone knows it." The armed man slurred. The other man, better dressed but equally angry, spat back, "You're drunk, Silas. Go sleep it off before you do something you'll regret." "Only thing I'll regret is not putting a bullet in you sooner." Dawson stepped between them, hands raised placatingly. "Gentlemen, this doesn't need to end badly. Why don't we—" He never finished the sentence. Silas, startled by Dawson's intervention, discharged his weapon. The gunshot echoed through the street, followed by a moment of terrible silence. Dawson staggered back, a crimson stain spreading across his left shoulder. Without thinking, Zara leaped from her horse and ran toward him, reaching him just as he sank to his knees. "I'm all right," he grunted, though his face had gone pale. "Just winged me." Sheriff Daniels arrived, quickly disarming Silas and calling for Doc Evans. As the doctor was summoned, Zara cradled Dawson's head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. She wanted desperately to speak, to tell him he would be all right, to somehow comfort him as he had comforted her countless times. But her voice remained imprisoned, locked away by the terror that gripped her heart. Doc Evans, a competent physician despite his advanced years and fondness for whiskey, determined that the bullet had passed cleanly through Dawson's shoulder, missing any vital structures. "He's a lucky man," the doctor proclaimed as he bandaged the wound in his small office. "Should heal clean, provided he rests and avoids infection." Alina insisted that Dawson recover at the boarding house rather than in the Spartan bunkhouse at the Wilson Ranch. "We have an empty room, and Zara and I can tend to him properly," she argued, brooking no opposition. In the days that followed, Zara barely left Dawson's side, nursing him through a brief fever and changing his bandages with gentle hands. She took leave from the dress shop, spending her days reading to him from one of Alina's books or simply sitting quietly while he slept. On the third night, as she dozed in a chair beside his bed, she was startled awake by his hand covering hers. "You should get some proper rest," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "I'm not dying, Zara." The use of her first name, rare even after months of acquaintance, made her heart flutter. She reached for her ever-present notebook, but Dawson shook his head. "You don't need to write anything. I can see it all in your eyes." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "You've been caring for me like I'm something precious. No one's ever done that before." Zara felt tears welling in her eyes. She wanted so desperately to tell him how she felt, how the thought of losing him had terrified her more than any outlaw's gun, how his voice had become not just her means of communication with the world but a lifeline, a connection she cherished beyond measure. As if reading her thoughts, Dawson continued softly, "I've been thinking about that land I mentioned. The bank's still holding it. With what I've saved, I could make a fair offer." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "It's a lonely place for just one person, though." Zara's breath caught in her throat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "I know it's forward of me, and I haven't spoken to your aunt yet, which I should do first if I were a proper gentleman. but I'm just a cowboy and not a very smooth-talking one at that." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to ask, Zara Daniels, is whether you might consider a future where I wouldn't have to speak for you anymore, not because you'd have your voice back, though I pray daily that you will, but because we'd be partners, equals, sharing everything, including our silences." A tear slipped down Zara's cheek as the magnitude of what he was proposing washed over her. Dawson mistook her emotion for hesitation and began to backtrack. "I'm getting ahead of myself. You hardly know me, and I'm not offering much." Zara pressed her fingers gently against his lips, silencing him. Then, with deliberate movements, she nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes," Dawson whispered, his expression a mixture of disbelief and joy. "You're saying yes." She nodded again, more emphatically this time, a smile breaking through her tears. Dawson's good arm came around her, pulling her closer until their foreheads touched. "I don't have a ring yet, and I need to speak with your aunt, do things proper. But I promise you this, Zara. Whether your voice comes back tomorrow or never returns at all, I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you're heard." In that moment, with her heart so full it felt near to bursting, Zara felt something loosen in her throat, a warmth spreading, a barrier dissolving. She parted her lips, and to her astonishment, a sound emerged, raspy and weak from disuse, but unmistakably her own voice. "Dawson," she whispered, the single word carrying all the emotion she'd held inside for months. His eyes widened in wonder. "Zara." "I love you," she said, each word slightly stronger than the last. "I love you, Dawson Grant." Their lips met in a tender kiss, sealing a promise that transcended words. The news of Dawson and Zara's engagement and the miraculous return of her voice spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. Alina, who had suspected their growing attachment for weeks, gave her blessing enthusiastically. "I've never seen two people more suited," she declared. "And if he makes you happy enough to find your voice again, then he's exactly the man you need." Zara's voice strengthened daily, though she sometimes still struggled when overtired or anxious. On those occasions, Dawson would seamlessly step in, anticipating her needs with the same intuition that had characterized their unique bond from the beginning. With Alina's help, Dawson secured a loan for the remainder of the purchase price on the small ranch he'd had his eye on. Thomas Wilson, pleased to see his best hand settling down but reluctant to lose him entirely, offered Dawson a partnership in a small breeding operation. Wilson would provide some of his best stock, and Dawson would raise them on his new land, sharing the profits. "It's a fair deal," Dawson told Zara as they walked the perimeter of what would soon be their property. "We won't be rich, but we'll be building something of our own." The cabin needed work: new shingles on the roof, repairs to the porch, fresh plaster on the interior walls, but Dawson tackled these tasks in the weeks leading up to their wedding, often with help from the townspeople who had come to respect both him and Zara. They were married on a crisp November day in 1878, with the entire town in attendance. Alina hosted the reception at the boarding house, where Martha Wilson and the other ladies of Silver Creek had outdone themselves preparing food and decorations. When it came time for the traditional toasts, Dawson rose first, raising his glass to his bride. "To Zara, who taught me that the most important things in life are often communicated without words." Then, to everyone's delight, Zara stood and spoke clearly, her voice carrying through the room. "And to Dawson, who gave me his voice when mine was lost, and who helped me find not only my words again but also my heart." That night, as they lay together in the small bedroom of their cabin, the moonlight casting silver patterns across the quilt, Zara traced the scar on Dawson's shoulder, a permanent reminder of how close she'd come to losing him before their life together had truly begun. "I never told you," she said softly, "but it was when you were shot that I first realized how deeply I loved you. The fear of losing you was greater than any fear I'd ever known, and yet it wasn't that fear that stole my voice. It was the fear of never telling you how I felt that finally broke through the silence." Dawson gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I fell in love with you long before you could say it back. I fell in love with your smile, your determination, the way you communicated so much without saying a word." "When did you know?" Zara asked, curious. Dawson considered the question. "I think it was that day by the creek when you asked if I ever got lonely. No one had ever asked me that before. No one had ever really seen me that way." He smiled in the darkness. "What about you? When did you start to feel something?" "From the beginning," Zara admitted. "The way you understood what I needed, how you spoke for me without making me feel less. It was like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." As winter settled over their small ranch, Dawson and Zara established routines that would form the foundation of their life together. Each morning, they rose before dawn Dawson to tend to the small herd of cattle that was the beginning of their breeding program. Zara to prepare breakfast and care for the chickens and vegetable garden she had started behind the cabin. 3 days a week, Dawson would drive Zara into town, where she continued to work at Martha's dress shop. Her reputation as a skilled seamstress had spread, bringing customers from neighboring towns who specifically requested her French lacework for wedding dresses and christening gowns. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, weather permitting, and talk about their days, their plans, their dreams for the future. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, Dawson carving wooden figurines, a hobby he had taken up during his recovery, while Zara mended or embroidered by lamplight. "I was thinking," Dawson said one such evening in early spring, as the first wildflowers were beginning to dot the grasslands surrounding their property, "we might add onto the cabin come summer. Another bedroom, perhaps." Zara glanced at him, noting the careful casualness of his tone. "Oh, are you expecting guests?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not exactly, but in a few months we might need the extra space." It took a moment for his meaning to register. When it did, Zara's hands flew to her mouth, her needle and thread forgotten in her lap. "Are you asking if?" Dawson set aside his carving and turned to face her fully. "Doc Evans's wife mentioned something when she picked up her new dress yesterday. Said you'd been in to see the doc last week. Said you had a certain glow about you." Zara's cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and joy. "I wanted to be sure before I told you. I was going to wait until your birthday next week." Dawson knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Are we really having a baby?" Zara finished, her voice strong and clear, filled with wonder. "Yes, Dawson. Around September, the doctor thinks." With a whoop of pure joy, Dawson lifted her from the chair and spun her in a gentle circle. "A baby, our baby." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "I didn't hurt you, did I? Should you be resting more, working less?" Zara laughed, the sound as free and beautiful as the spring breeze. "I'm with child, not made of glass. But I do appreciate the concern, husband." That night, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Dawson's hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrified, voiceless young woman who had arrived in Silver Creek less than a year ago to the confident, loved wife and soon-to-be mother, she was now the transformation seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking?" Dawson murmured, sensing her contemplative mood. "I was thinking about fear," Zara replied softly. About how it stole my voice, but in doing so led me to you. How sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. Dawson's arms tightened around her. If I could go back and change things, prevent the stagecoach attack, somehow spare you that fear, I wouldn't. Not if it meant losing what we've found together. Nor would I, Zara agreed. Though I hope our child never knows the kind of fear that silences them. With you as their mother. Not a chance. Dawson pressed a kiss to her temple. You're the bravest person I know, Zara Grant. The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Dawson completed the addition to the cabin, creating a snug bedroom for the baby with a window that caught the morning light. Zara sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her skilled fingers creating delicate embroidery on soft flannel. Word of the coming baby spread through Silver Creek, resulting in a steady stream of gifts and advice from well-meaning neighbors. Eleanor visited often, helping Zara prepare for the birth and sharing stories of Zara's own mother during her pregnancy. You're so much like her, Eleanor would say wistfully. She would be so proud of the woman you've become. As her body changed, Zara found unexpected confidence in her new role. The occasional moments when her voice would falter, typically during thunderstorms, which still triggered memories of the fire that had first stolen her voice, no longer filled her with the same despair. Dawson remained attuned to her needs, stepping in seamlessly when necessary, but increasingly, Zara found her own ways to push through the momentary silences. The fear doesn't own me anymore, she told Dawson one night as they watched a summer storm from the safety of their porch. It visits sometimes, but it can't stay. On a warm September morning in 1879, after a night of labor attended by Doc Evans and Eleanor, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Dawson, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom door throughout the ordeal, was finally allowed in to meet his daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he gazed at the tiny bundle in Zara's arms. Just like her mother. They named her Hope, Eleanor Grant Hope, for what she represented to both of them. Eleanor for the aunt who had made their meeting possible. In the weeks that followed, Zara discovered a new dimension to her voice as she sang lullabies to her daughter, the soft melodies filling their home with a warmth that seemed to radiate outward, touching every aspect of their lives. One evening, as October painted the surrounding hills in shades of gold and crimson, Dawson returned from town with news. The bank was selling another parcel of land adjacent to theirs, good grazing land with a year-round spring. "It would stretch us financially," he admitted as they discussed it over dinner, baby Hope sleeping peacefully in the cradle Dawson had crafted. "But with the profits from this year's calves and what we've saved from your dress work, we could manage it. It would mean more security for Hope's future." Zara considered this, then spoke with the confidence that had become her hallmark. "Let's do it. I believe in what we're building here, Dawson, not just a ranch but a legacy." The purchase was completed before the first snow fell, doubling the size of their holdings and cementing their status as landowners rather than just smallholders. Thomas Wilson, impressed by Dawson's acumen and hard work, expanded their breeding partnership, providing additional stock and increased profit sharing. As Hope grew from infant to toddler, the Grant Ranch flourished alongside her. Dawson hired 2 hands to help with the expanding herd, building a small bunkhouse for them near the main barn. Zara continued her seamstress work, but more selectively now, focusing on special commissions that allowed her to work from home while caring for Hope. By the spring of 1881, their small family expanded again with the birth of a son, whom they named Daniel Thomas Grant. Dawson, if possible, was even more besotted with his son than he had been with Hope, carrying the baby with him as he supervised ranch work, proudly showing him off to the hands and neighbors. "He's going to be a cattleman like his father," Dawson would declare. "Perhaps," Zara would respond with a knowing smile. "Or perhaps he'll find his own path, just as we did." One clear evening in the summer of 1882, nearly 4 years after Zara had first arrived in Silver Creek, the Grant family hosted a gathering at their ranch. The occasion was the completion of their new main house, a spacious, 2-story structure that replaced the original cabin, which they preserved as a guest house. Friends from town and neighboring ranches filled the yard. Children played on the new swing set Dawson had built, and tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by the women of the community. As twilight approached, Thomas Wilson called for everyone's attention, raising his glass in a toast. "To Dawson and Zara Grant, who have transformed a modest patch of desert into one of the finest small ranches in the territory. Your hard work and vision are an inspiration to us all." Cheers erupted from the assembled guests. When they quieted, Wilson continued, a twinkle in his eye. "And since we're celebrating new beginnings, I have an announcement of my own. As of next month, I'm officially taking on a partner in the Wilson Ranch. Dawson Grant will be acquiring a 20% interest, with the option to increase that stake over the coming years." Surprised murmurs rippled through the crowd. Zara turned to her husband, her expression questioning. "I was going to tell you tonight," Dawson said softly. "Wilson approached me last week. He has no sons and his daughter's husband has no interest in ranching. He's looking toward the future." Eleanor, who had been bouncing young Daniel on her knee, moved closer to hear. "This is a significant opportunity, Dawson." He nodded, his eyes never leaving Zara's. "It would mean dividing my time between our place and Wilson's, at least initially. More responsibility, more risk. But also more potential for growth, for building something substantial for Hope and Daniel." Zara didn't hesitate. "You should accept," she said firmly. "We've come this far by taking chances and believing in each other. Why stop now?" As the celebration continued around them, Dawson pulled Zara aside, leading her to the newly constructed gazebo overlooking the creek that ran along the eastern edge of their property. In the deepening dusk, with the sounds of laughter and music floating on the summer air, he took both her hands in his. "I couldn't have imagined this life 4 years ago," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A successful ranch, 2 beautiful children, a partnership with Wilson. And you, Zara. None of it would exist without you." "We built it together," Zara replied, squeezing his hands. "Your strength and my voice working as one." Dawson smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Do you remember what I said to you the night I proposed? That I would make sure you were heard, whether your voice returned or not." Zara nodded, the memory still vivid after all this time. "I never could have imagined how powerful your voice would become," Dawson continued. "Not just in our home or in town, but in the way you've shaped our future, our children's future. You speak now not just with words, but with actions, with love, with the life we've created together." "As do you," Zara whispered, leaning into his embrace. "We both found our voices here, in this place, in each other." As they stood together in the gathering darkness, the stars beginning to pepper the vast desert sky above them, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a terrified young woman whose voice had been stolen by fear, to a confident wife, mother, and partner, who spoke not only for herself, but for the dreams and aspirations of her family. And from a solitary cowboy who had never imagined putting down roots, to a respected rancher, building a legacy for generations to come. The path had not been without challenges, droughts that threatened their cattle, illness that had swept through Silver Creek one harsh winter, the occasional return of Zara's silence during moments of extreme stress. But through it all, they had faced each obstacle together, their bond strengthening with each trial overcome. As they walked hand in hand back to their guests, to the home and life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work, Zara felt a profound sense of gratitude for the fear that had once silenced her, which had ultimately led her to this place. For the cowboy who had spoken for her until she found her own voice again, and for the love that had transformed them both, giving voice to dreams neither had dared to speak aloud before finding each other. In the years that followed, the Grant family continued to thrive. Hope grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet strength. Daniel developed his father's affinity for cattle and horses, spending every possible moment working alongside Dawson on their expanding ranch. By 1890, the Grants had acquired additional land, bringing their holdings to over 500 acres. Dawson's partnership with Thomas Wilson had evolved. Following Wilson's peaceful passing in his sleep, Dawson assumed management of both ranches, eventually merging them under the name Wilson Grant Ranch, one of the most respected cattle operations in the Arizona Territory. Zara's dress shop in town, which she had purchased from Martha when the older woman retired, became known throughout the territory for its fine work. She employed several young women, teaching them the skills she had learned in St. Louis, and developing a reputation for giving opportunities to those who, like her younger self, needed a fresh start. The original cabin where they had begun their life together remained standing on their property, preserved as a reminder of their humble beginnings. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the ranch work was done, and the children were occupied with their own pursuits, Dawson and Zara would walk there hand in hand, remembering the young couple who had faced an uncertain future with nothing but love and determination to guide them. "Did you ever imagine we'd come this far?" Zara would ask, her voice strong and clear, all traces of her former silence long since vanished. And Dawson, his hair now streaked with silver but his blue eyes as bright as ever, would smile and reply, "With you finding your voice to lead the way." "I never doubted it for a moment,"